And 19 years ago, the Turkish government was forced out by the military in what became known as the postmodern coup. The military believed the government had become too religious and presented the Prime Minister with a list of demands. They included a ban on headscarves at universities and other public institutions. People in public office thought to be conservative were blacklisted, and most public schools offering religious courses were closed. TRT World's Francis Collins has been looking at the legacy of those events.
When the coalition government of Necmettin Erbakan was forced from power in 1997, Elif Nurulu was a student in Istanbul. Heading for a career in medicine, her life took a different course. She believes her university entrance exam was marked down on purpose, denying her a place at a medical university.
We entered university entrance exam, and I did a good grade, but since I graduated from Imam Hatip High School, my grades were counted 30 points lower. At the same time, our grades were lower, were counted lower, plus headscarf was banned.
It was part of a policy to downgrade students from certain schools. The events of 1997 were termed a postmodern coup because there was no mass violence. The military at the time, which saw itself as the guarantor of a secular Turkey, deemed the government to be too religious in nature. On this day, 19 years ago, it presented Prime Minister Erbakan with a list of demands. They included enforcing a ban on headscarves at universities and the closure of many religious schools.
It was at universities like this one here in Istanbul where people protested loudly and strongly against the rules imposed by the military. Lives were changed. Many had to go overseas to continue their education. But did it alter essentially Turkish society?
It first of all led to the rise of the Muslim Democrats that we have today, with the Justice and Development Party being established, with them breaking away from the Welfare Party, finding their own niche within the political spectrum, and the entire spectrum with all its effects on the Turkish society changed.
The military maintained it was upholding the secular principles of the constitution. 19 years later, there's an ongoing legal process against those involved. These days, Elif is still in the classroom, but as a lecturer in macroeconomics. She never became the doctor she wanted to be and spent many years outside the country.
Just I could ask, so what did you gain? Now, I'm among the lucky ones who could continue in a way in another country. But there are many people who couldn't study at that time, who couldn't work, and who had to give up and stay at home.
But as things stand, without a change in the law, what happened to Elif could happen again to others in the future. Francis Collins, TRT World.
Well, for more on this story, I'm joined now by Professor Halil Berktay from Istanbul's Sabanci University. Professor, thank you very much for coming in. So let's just start off with, what do you think, what affects us most about what happened back in 1997, affects us most today?
It was an enormously important turning point in terms of what has happened. It was intended as a final obstacle or a final stop to the rise of political Islam in Turkey. Actually, it had the opposite outcome or consequence. It's yet another demonstration of what we historians call the law of unintended consequences. Because it was so blatantly illegitimate and because it unjustly victimized so many young people, especially over the headscarf. There was, in the end, a not very noticeable but still profound public reaction against it. And it was this reaction which ultimately brought the AKP to power in the elections of 2002.
Absolutely.
It was, in the 1990s, the situation was all the old political parties were going bankrupt, basically, one by one. And it was a time of multi-party coalitions with increasingly shrinking social bases, increasingly shrinking social support, and ultimately the Welfare Party, led by the late Mr. Erbakan, won big in one major election at that time, and this led to the Erbakan-led coalition government of 96-97, and the military stepped in. As we have heard, they claimed that modernist secularism in Turkey was being abandoned in favor of religious reaction or religious obscurantism. They held an emergency meeting of the National Security Council and adopted all those harsh measures and tried to get Prime Minister Erbakan to put his signature to them. He refused, to his credit. And then over the next few months, there were increasing provocations against the government, increasing pressure brought to bear on the government by the military, and eventually Erbakan was forced to resign on 18th June 97.
I mean, some of the things we're seeing in today's politics must have an effect. I mean, as we know, President Erdogan was jailed back then for reading a poem out. I mean, how much do you think what happened then, what happened to him personally, has affected his politics
enormously, in two different ways. Seen in retrospect, the Erbakan-led political Islam, the old political Islam in Turkey, from the 1960s to the mid-1990s was relatively provincial, narrow-minded, parochial in outlook. It had this mirror image of crusading mentality, kind of anti-Western and very strongly anti-Western attitude. It was tactically naive in terms of parliamentary politics. In the run-up to 1997, 28th June, Mr. Erbakan and his close colleagues made a number of rather big mistakes in provoking a confrontation with the military at too early a point. Eventually what happened was Mr. Erdogan and Abdullah Gül and other members of the present leadership of the AKP, they broke away from the Erbakan-led old movement with a much more gradualistic, much more moderate, much more reform-minded outlook that recognized the need for Turkey to maintain a secularist outlook in principle, albeit not an authoritarian secularist outlook, and B, the need to coexist in a multicultural world with the West.
Absolutely.
And they created a new program on the basis of that, and it was that new program that has brought the AKP to power and kept it in power since 2002.
Okay, Professor Berktay, thank you so much for coming. We'll definitely leave it there, but thank you very much for your time. Thank you.